So for those of you new to the podcast, I have for years been doing the podcast as kind of my full-time primary thing, and I have dipped into savings. I have cashed out Bitcoin, cashed out retirement accounts, but it has not yet become a full-time income. I say yet. So I'm picking up some extra work, professional gunfighting, as you might imagine, making that mercenary money to stack it up. But the goal is still, God willing, to make this the full-time income. So you're going to hear some more recycled content, some more tactical reload content. Now, not today. This is new content. Just giving you a warning. I thought of something new for this week. The 20th through the 25th. Go to the Patreon page if you've never been there. Sign up as a free patron. There's a thing to sign up for as a free patron. Now, a lot of that content usually I put out for paid members. But this week, if you're listening to this when it comes out, or in the future you can go back and listen to this content. The content coming out from the 20th to the 25th every day, there will be a Patreon page exclusive content episode only on Patreon. You can sign up for free. I mean, if you want to sign up as a Patreon member, you've been thinking about it anyway, go ahead. But just to give you a little taste of what Patreon gets, you can sign up as a free member and get that content. So scroll down, hit the link, and get Patreon-only content that won't come out on the regular podcast. To give you an idea of things coming out for the Patreon page only that week, End of the World 2024 episode. Water is not everywhere. Practical Tactical Fashion Part 1. Practical Tactical Fashion Footwear. Anyway, that's some content that'll be coming out on Patreon. Patreon only. So go to the Patreon page and sign up. Sign up as a member. Check out the content that's only there. Now to the content. Combat handguns. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. So if that intrigues you, hopefully you'll stay tuned for today's episode. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, all manner of things the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. On that real-world first-hand experience, I'm going to throw in the bio. If you've heard it before, go ahead and fast forward. While you're listening or fast-forwarding it, I would encourage you to like, share, subscribe to the podcast. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as a instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder, certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life and He said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young, good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength. It's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. Okay, today we're going to be talking about combat handguns. Attributes that make up a combat handgun. First of all, I want to talk about not everything is a combat handgun. And guns can be good guns. Guns can be good handguns and not be a combat handgun. For instance, I love Smith & Wesson J-frames. Not a combat handgun. Ruger LCP, not a combat handgun. They're handguns. But just like knives are very different. Not every knife is a combat knife. Not every pocket knife even is a combat knife. Just like not every semi-auto handgun is a combat handgun. A SIG 365 is not a combat handgun. So let's not kid ourselves and pretend that it is. Just like a Victorinox Classic, one of those little Swiss Army knives, it's not a bad knife. I have one in my pocket. It's not my main go-to knife that I have on me, but it's a backup knife for cutting small boxes and things. But that little Victorinox Classic Swiss Army knife is not a combat knife. It might have the word Army in the title, but it's not a combat knife. Now, a U.S. Marine Corps K-bar, that is a combat knife. I don't think anybody would argue with that. It's one of the quintessential 20th century and going into the 21st century combat knives. Both a Victorinox Swiss Army knife and a K-bar are both knives. They're both made out of steel. They both have a handle. They both have a lot of similarities, but they are not both combat knives. Just like many, and they're both decent knives for their intended purpose. But not all handguns, not even all semi-auto handguns, not even all new polymer striker-fired polymer handguns 9mm are combat handguns. Today we're talking about combat handguns. And you having a combat handgun does not mean that you're ready for combat. Skill is more important. Skill is more important than the variations of different models than this caliber versus that caliber, or do you have 7 rounds or 15 rounds on tap? Or what kind of Gucci features you have on your handgun. Skill, training, proficiency is more important. All right, with that, let's talk about attributes that I think are common, maybe even quintessential to a combat handgun. Number 1, reliability. They need to be reliable. Period. Right? A combat handgun needs to be reliable. Handguns today, most quality manufactured handguns today. Glock, SIG, Smith & Wesson, H&K, FN, they make good, reliable handguns. But don't take it for granted. Not every handgun is reliable. Not even every Glock is reliable. I've seen plenty of Glocks come brand new out of the box that aren't reliable. And if you are around enough and do enough, kind of big agency work or managing a gun shop or doing like private contracting, you go see enough Glocks, you'll see some that aren't reliable. So we're talking about in general for the model. You can get any model. You can get a Glock 17 that's not reliable, right? It's a thing. It happens. I know people might gasp at that and think that's not true. But again, if you've been around enough Glocks, and you can't make millions of everything, humans are fallible. one or two of those in the millions of Glock 17s coming out are going to have issues. That's just how that works. So, but I'm talking about in general, the make and model of that gun is generally reliable. And this is a common theme throughout good combat handguns. And it spans time, it spans culture. You know, a 1911 and a CZ75, both really reliable. Very kind of different guns, but both known as being reliable handguns. Also, ease of maintenance. Easy to take down on field trip. Maybe not completely take down, because there's a lot of guns on the list that aren't easy to completely take down. But as far as field stripping goes, as far as field maintenance by the end user in the field, they are easy to maintain, they are easy to take down and put back together. That's a pretty common and important attribute for a combat handgun. Another one is the ability to clear malfunctions easily, quickly. Because no matter how reliable a handgun is, at some point, unless it gets destroyed first or it just doesn't get shot, it's going to have a malfunction. Malfunctions happen. Even if theoretically there was somewhere a semi-automatic firearm or revolver or any kind of machine that was completely reliable, which I would argue doesn't exist, but even if it did, the ammunition and the magazine are part of that too. So even if you have 100%, even if you had a 100% reliable handgun, the ammunition may not be 100% reliable, which leads to clearing malfunctions. Clearing malfunctions should be easy, and this is going to get partially into size, but a lot of these little tiny guns we talked about that aren't combat handguns, right? Get a double feed in a Ruger LCP and try and clear it quickly. A combat handgun is going to have enough real estate, enough purchase on the slide, on things like that, to enough grip on the magazine, enough to get a full firing grip on the gun and have the magazine hang out so you don't have to readjust your hand to clear a malfunction. A failure to fire, a double feed, things like that. If we look at that, clearing malfunctions is important. That's another common attribute of fighting combat handguns, the ability to clear a malfunction quickly. They should be reliable to begin with, but the ability to clear a malfunction quickly is important. You guys probably know, keep up with Gunfighter Life. I'm literally going through training right now for private contracting work, and we're running some of the most reliable handguns known to man. And out of a 50-round qual, 2 of us had malfunctions. I had a malfunction, and one of the other guys had a malfunction during a qual. It's a 50-round qual. And you might think that's not a reliable handgun, but you're not talking about how a lot of people think of shooting all the time. That's all well and good to stand and face a target square and two-handed and all that stuff, and that definitely helps. But what about when you're running a gun fast and dirty, literally, and you're shooting CQB type stuff and retention type stuff and extreme close quarters kind of techniques and one-handed and all kinds of other stuff. Maybe the gun's not straight up and down. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And when that malfunction happens, because malfunctions happen, you need to be able to fix it and correct it quickly. That is a good attribute for combat handgun. Caliber. Let's get into the great caliber debate. 9mm is the de facto handgun cartridge of our time. Period. Like it or not. I'm not saying it's always the best choice. I'm not saying you have to like it, but I'm saying that is the de facto standard. It's really hard to argue with that. It's like saying that fossil fuel, petroleum, diesel, gasoline engines are the de facto mode of transportation of our time. You can like it or not, but that is what it is. 9mm for this, I think, is the minimum. There are some other Gucci calibers that you might argue. The one that stands out is maybe you could make the argument that an FN57 is a combat handgun. And I wouldn't really fight you on that, but it's not real common. I don't think 380 is a combat handgun caliber. You're talking 9mm or better pretty common standard calibers. And I say pretty common. So 9mm, 357 SIG, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP. Again, with 9mm being the standard. So it's got to be powerful enough, right? 22 handguns are great, and I like to train with them, and they may have certain niche applications, even for martial applications, but they're not a combat handgun. At least not in my definition. So 9mm or larger for the caliber. Now, let's talk about capacity. And I'm all for your right to have high-capacity handguns. My standard carry gun is 15 to 17 rounds and a 20-something round reload. That's my standard CCW carry gun. Have it on me right now. It's what I took to the gym this morning. I'm all for high capacity, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary as people think. They get into these debates like, oh, it's, gotta be at least whatever, and gotta have these extended mags. Because in real situations, in general, you're not doing mag dumps at a berm like a lot of channels and people do just to go to turn money into noise. That's fine if you want to do that, but realize that's what you're doing. You're turning money into noise. In real situations, you're generally, hopefully, still moving around, taking cover, moving from cover, moving into and out of position, acquiring different targets. In doing that, you can change magazines. So capacity, you need a few rounds on tap, but you need the ability to quickly change magazines. And if you're quick at magazine changes, in the time it takes you to move from one place to another, you can change magazines. And if you're doing both at the same time, that efficiency and duality of movement, I'm moving to cover while reloading, or I'm moving from one position to another while reloading, really doesn't take away a lot of combat effectiveness, in my opinion. Some people may argue with that. And there's nothing wrong with what many would consider today, and I would too, standard capacity magazines, 15, 17, 20 round magazines. Totally fine. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary as some people make it for a combat handgun. As long as you can change the magazine quickly. For instance, I would rather have a 1911 style, which is really quick for magazine changes. It's really kind of stood the test of time. In fact, it's still one of the number one type handguns in competition. And we could get into a whole rabbit hole about what is a 1911 and what is not. And only a true World War I 1911 is actually a 1911. But you get what I'm saying. That whole genre, it has stood the test of time. It is quick to reload. I would take a 7, 8 shot, 10 shot 1911 with a quick magazine change over a 15 round gun with a heel magazine release, which aren't very common today, but that proves the point. Although I may have less rounds initially, I can put fresh ammunition in that gun quickly and get back into action quickly. Fast reloads, including tactical reloads and speed or emergency reloads, whatever your common vernacular is. It needs that. It needs some amount of capacity, and it needs the ability to reload quickly on the move. And again, you'll see this pretty standard across the board in modern combat handguns. From Glock 17 to a Beretta 92. Both do that very well. Now, what about accuracy? Accuracy, to me, is very important in a handgun. Accuracy is important to me in a combat handgun. And a lot of people will say, well, most handgun encounters are close. Again, this is a combat handgun. If you just want to carry your Ruger LCP to, get a meth addict off of you at arm's length distance at a gas station, that's fine. Do that, but that's not a combat handgun. Combat handgun, you may have to get hits at distance. 25, 50 meters or more. And a handgun should be accurate to do that. Again, training and experience and ability is important, because if you can't get the hits on target, it doesn't matter how accurate the handgun is. If you're flinching, anticipating, and dropping shots at, 3 yards, probably not important how accurate the handgun is at 50 yards. You need to be more accurate. But if you are accurate and competent with a handgun, I think the handgun should be accurate. this is one of the places where I'd call the Glock in this regard marginal, especially the older gens. The Gen 5s tend to be a little bit more accurate. The older generations, the Gen 3s, the Gen 4s, I would consider them marginal at best for accuracy. Other ones like the Beretta M9, even the old 1911, the new M17 can be quite accurate, pleasantly accurate. Accuracy is important because then you may have to use these at distance. Now let's talk about size. We mentioned guns should be big enough for you to be able to clear malfunctions reliably. We also mentioned hits at distance, and people will often get into the caliber wars of this caliber versus that caliber, this versus that, but barrel length, going from an extremely short to an extremely long barrel length in a given caliber can be more of a difference than going from one caliber to another in a same barrel length. I don't think enough attention is put or emphasized on barrel length. So size of the handgun, for a couple of reasons. One, a full firing grip on the handgun. You don't want your hands hanging off the gun for a combat handgun. You need to be able to grip it properly and get as much purchase and real estate between your interface, between your hands and that gun as possible. That's important. Hopefully that magazine will drop free without interfering with your hands, which denotes you need a certain size handgun grip. Also, we talked about the barrel and the slide. You're going to need a certain amount of length of barrel if you're talking about iron sights, which we'll get into optics and talk about those a little bit. But for iron sights, sight radius is important. You need a fair amount of sight radius. You also need a fair amount of barrel length to achieve decent ballistic performance, especially if you're talking about hollow point ammunition, because it's velocity based. And enough real estate on that slide to clear malfunctions easily. A decent grip on that gun in adverse conditions to manipulate that slide for different things. That's important. Now, I like a full-size combat handgun, and I would consider that best, but not essential. And I would consider a full-size handgun 5-inch barrel. A 5-inch barrel, like your classic 1911, very similar to your Beretta M9, your M17 is pretty close to that. A full-size handgun, which again I would consider around 5 inches, but I would consider acceptable around 4 inches. And the quintessential, as small as I would go for this, is the Glock 19. Glock 19 I would consider, even though it's a compact, I would consider it a combat handgun. Plenty of military and police use that as a, let's say, duty combat handgun. The Glock 19 is a really sweet spot. As much as I don't like to encourage people to carry Glocks, it's not a bad choice for this. It's a good size. It's small enough that a lot of people consider it concealable, and it's big enough to be an effective combat handgun. That size, the Glock 19 size, the 19X, the M18, which is the compact version variant of the M17, these I would still consider a combat effective handgun. So I'm going to say around 4 inches. Now it could be like 3.8, 3.9, 4.1, but you get the idea. That Glock 19-ish barrel length. M18 has a 3.9-inch barrel. The Glock 19 actually has a slightly longer barrel with 4.01 inches. But you get right in that ballpark, right in that size range. That would be the minimum for me. Again, not about guns that I like. I really like the Glock 26. I actually kind of think I like it more than the Glock 19, but I would not consider the Glock 26 a combat handgun. It's too small. The 365 is not a bad, micro 9, but I would not consider a micro 9 a combat handgun. It's its own thing. It's a micro 9. Don't try and make it a combat handgun. It's a 3-inch barrel. I think that's too small. Now, I would not consider the ability to mount optics a must on a combat handgun, but I would consider it a force multiplier, especially in 2024. And this is coming from a guy that for, I think, way too long, honestly, I was against optics on handguns. I thought they're not going to last, they're not going to be durable, they're not going to be reliable. They're a crutch, but they really can be a force multiplier. So I was wrong on that. And I actually advised my guys when I was the commander of a tactical team to stay away from them, although I would allow them to use them if they wanted. I actually was against them and told my guys to be away from them, and I was wrong about that. I actually said, instead of me just saying that, let me actually test it and try it and go through a trial period with optics. And yeah, they can be a fantastic force multiplier. So I think it's a really, really nice to have on a combat handgun in 2024. A must-have? No. Other things I think are exponentially more important, like reliability, ability to clear a malfunction. I'm talking a rugged, reliable combat handgun optic, a cheap, budget, unreliable Chinese optic, not a combat handgun optic. And we could probably do an entire episode on that, but I would rather have good iron sights than a garbage optic on a combat handgun. If you want to run a budget, cheap Chinese optic on a training gun, on a plinking gun, knock yourself out. But a combat handgun, no, it needs to be rugged and reliable. A Trijicon, a Delta Point Pro, again, that should probably be a whole episode. But I would consider it a really nice to have on a combat handgun. And another big one is longevity. It's one thing for going to be reliable for 50 rounds, 100 rounds. A lot of people are like, my gun's reliable because they've shot at 50 or 100 rounds. And you're talking, that's like a couple of hours of training. For example, when I looked it up, I saw that the XM17 trials, XM18 trials, our latest military adopted handgun, called for a 35,000 round service life. That's longevity. That's what I'm talking about. Thousands and thousands of rounds. 1911s go thousands and thousands of rounds. M9s go thousands and thousands of rounds. Glock 17s honestly probably go the longest. They can go just ridiculous amounts of time with very little maintenance and upkeep and just crazy high round counts. The XM17 we just talked about, 35,000 rounds. So longevity. And that's where a lot of these budget handguns that might check all the other boxes may not fit here. You know, might a Taurus, I don't know, 24/7 or whatever they're on now, might that check a lot of these other boxes? Maybe. Is it going to go 35,000 rounds, 50,000 rounds, 100,000 rounds? And that's a big fat question mark that I honestly can't answer. But longevity, I think, is also important for a combat handgun. So, to recap, a effective combat handgun has a lot of commonality. Reliability, ability to clear malfunctions, ease and simplicity of maintenance and takedown for field stripping. Caliber, 9mm or greater. Capacity and ability to reload quickly. Accuracy. Size, a manageable fighting size handgun. Optics, nice to have, not a need to have. And longevity of the platform. Because if you're talking about a combat handgun, you should probably train with it. And if you train a lot, you're going to put a lot of rounds through that handgun. It should stand up to it. Now, this is what I'm going to get into and maybe harp on you a little bit and hopefully maybe change your mind about what you actually carry. Because I've recorded an episode, I don't know if you've listened to it or not by the time you hear this, but handgun is a primary, a philosophy change. You see, I think, and I'm military and law enforcement myself, but I think too many times we adopt things that don't really apply to us. If you're a civilian in a standard civilian world, with few exceptions, a handgun is probably your primary. Different than a lot of other roles. A lot of Marines, a lot of soldiers don't even get issued a handgun. Now, I did actually use a handgun in both the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. My primary MOS listed on both was infantry. But that's pretty rare. Even a lot of infantrymen, other than like familiarization, don't really carry a handgun. They carry a rifle. That's their primary thing. But not so as a civilian a lot of times. Or even many cops. They may have a long gun, but it may be in their car. So a lot of times if they get into a hairy situation, their gun that they have is a handgun. The whole reason I switched from more precision rifle shooting to action kind of combat-styled handgun competition shooting, because I thought if I was going to get into an altercation to save my life, it was most likely going to be with a handgun. And I would submit you, as a citizen, or maybe even other roles, your primary is going to be your handgun. So if hitherto you've carried some of these micro 9s or really small guns, and there's a time and a place for that from time to time, but what of those attributes that I talked about in a combat handgun would you not like to have if you were in a fight for your life? Right? As the good guy, you're probably going to be reacting. If you're reacting in a fight for your life, which one of those attributes are you like, nah, I don't want that? So I get that not everybody can, but if you can, instead of just making excuses and carrying that LCP and saying it's just as good as a full-size combat handgun, it is not. It is not. It might get the job done, but that's like saying I can drive nails with a shovel. I can drive nails with a shovel, but it's better to have a hammer. Just because something can get the job done doesn't make it just as good. Consider carrying a combat handgun for your day-to-day carry gun. Something with all those attributes. Something you can put a lot of rounds through and train with. Something that's accurate, reliable, ability to clear malfunctions, ease of maintenance. If there's, hopefully never, but if there is an active shooter at your church, right? Do you want a SIG 226 or do you want a Ruger LCP? Do you want a Beretta M9 or a Smith & Wesson J-frame? So anyway, just that's how I wanted to kind of close this episode out. If the attributes that make a good combat handgun, something you might want to have a day-to-day, consider carrying one day-to-day. And maybe you don't have to do what I do and carry in general a full-size fighting handgun. If you can't, maybe you want to have one in your vehicle, right? Maybe you want to have it. I've talked about truck guns and handguns as truck guns. You might want to have a long gun in your truck as well. But maybe you carry a smaller gun, but you have a combat handgun in your bug-out bag in your truck, or in a laptop bag in your truck, or in a center console locked somehow in your truck. Whatever the case is, right? Consider the attributes of a combat handgun and if and when you should, if ever, have that as a part of your day-to-day life. Anyway, consider the combat handgun. With that, your tactical tip of the day. I recently, as part of my training, went through some medical training. My Red Cross was expired. My first aid Red Cross was expired. That might not sound super high-speed, tactical, but American Red Cross CPR stuff is important. If you don't have that, maybe before you even worry about the high-speed TCCC, which I've had also, maybe get your American Red Cross certificate back up. If you've never had it, maybe get it, right? Because that could be important. Guns don't solve every problem, right? You could have the best combat handgun in the world, and if you have a little infant that can't breathe and it dies in your arms because you don't know what to do, or you watch it die in its mom's arms because you don't have any idea how to help, right? You can't fix that problem with a Beretta M9. You can't fix it with the best combat handgun ever made. You might be able, I'm not saying you absolutely can, but if a baby's choking and you know modern Red Cross CPR, there's a section on there for infants. You might know how to clear that obstruction. Again, as much as I like guns, and by God's grace make my way in this world with a Bible and a gun, guns don't solve every problem. Maybe think about getting that Red Cross first aid CPR certificate. If you want more advanced medical training, again, I've had it. I'm not hitting you for not having it, but not everything is solved with a tourniquet, right? There are other things. So consider that Red Cross certificate. There's even an app for the American Red Cross thing that you can get on your phone. So if you want to download that, and I'll still get the training, but the app has stuff on there that could be handy. I pulled it up right now. I have it on my phone. There's little tabs. I just opened it. Allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, asthma attack, bites and stings, bleeding, burns, cardiac arrest, choking, cold-related illness, concussion, dehydration, diabetic emergencies, and it goes on. Right? I mean, pretty important. So anyway, consider that. Consider just either recertifying. To be honest, mine had been expired for a couple of years. Recertifying, or if you've never had it, getting your American Red Cross first aid certification. With that, your tactical verse of the day. Remember, the coolest gun, the coolest ammo, whatever it is just stuff. The verse of the day. Now godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these things we shall be content. The first part of that again. Now godliness with contentment is great gain. Thanks, men. Have a blessed day.